Hello and welcome to your Coast Guard. I'm your host, Ensign Andre Bilodeau. Tonight I'd like to welcome our new viewers from Wilmington, North Carolina. Welcome to your Coast Guard. Tonight's show we'll look at the history of the Coast Guard in eastern North Carolina by looking at Camp Glenn, the Coast Guard's first air station in the United States. It was founded only miles from here in Morehead City. From there, we'll interview the Group Commander Robert Atkin and discover his goals and missions for 1995, affecting the boating public in North Carolina. From there, we'll take you across base and introduce you to the Coast Guard cutter Gentian, a black-hulled 180-foot buoy tender responsible for H navigation up and down the coast. We'll also review the Sea Partners program designed to protect the marine environment here along our shores. But first, we'll get back to Camp Glenn. We have a historical selection of photos to show you, and we'll get to that after these messages.
On an average Coast Guard day in 1994, the Coast Guard seized 209 pounds of marijuana, 170 pounds of cocaine, worth $9.2 million.
On an average day in 1994, the Coast Guard investigated 17 marine accidents and investigated 64 commercial vessels.
We're here today to tell you about the history of the United States Coast Guard and its ties to historical Camp Glenn. Few people know that this camp even existed in eastern North Carolina and how it played an important role in the life of the Coast Guard as well as maintaining a military presence in the area. Where is Camp Glenn? Well, Camp Glenn is gone now. What stands in its place is Carteret General Hospital, the Morehead City Post Office, and Carteret Community College. Today, Fort Macon and Cherry Point Marine Corps Air Station have replaced the duties that were once Camp Glenn's responsibility. Where did it get its name? Camp Glenn was named in honor of Robert B. Glenn, who was the governor of North Carolina from 1905 to 1909. Originally a National Guard camp in 1905, Camp Glenn became a Navy base between 1916 and 1917. Then, between 1920 and 1921, it was used as a Coast Guard air station. During World War II, it was turned over to the Navy, and it helped establish a strong military presence in eastern North Carolina's military-generated economy, based mostly on today's Coast Guard and Marine Corps presence.
Camp Glenn has the distinction of being the first Coast Guard air station in America. This was accomplished by Lieutenant Commander Stanley Parker, who headed Coast Guard Aviation Headquarters, Washington, D.C., and Captain William Wishar, Coast Guard Aviator Number 5. Lieutenant Commander Parker informed Captain Wishar that he would command the first Coast Guard air station and asked Captain Wishar to choose between Key West Carolina. It was felt that the Morehead City Station would best serve the purpose because of the rougher weather, and it was closer to the graveyard of the Atlantic, Cape Hatteras. This would ensure more opportunities to locate vessels in distress, derelicts, menaces to navigation, and vessels ashore on the Diamond Shoals, Lookout Shoals, and Frying Pan Shoals, thus proving the value of Coast Guard aviation. In 1920, Lieutenant Elmer Stone, a member of the United States Coast Guard, was trained by the Navy and was designated Coast Guard Aviator Number 1. He was best known for testing catapults and arresting gear for aircraft carriers. Today, the Marines are the only service that uses arresting gear to trap jet aircraft on land. The testing that Lieutenant Stone helped to develop is something that is used every day at Bogue Field and Atlantic. A remarkable collection of old black and white photographs has recently been donated to the Carteret County Museum of Art and History by Dr. Robert Jackson. His father was attached to the first contingency of Naval Air formed at Morehead City. The photos tell a story about Camp Glenn and the people who served this country during some very important military events.
The recently acquired photos greatly added to the existing ones and shed some light on how Camp Glenn evolved from row upon row of National Guard tents to more permanent buildings in 1916. The photos give us a little insight on what life was like for the military man during that period of time. This collection of pictures includes the storm that hit the coast in 1918, blanking it with several inches of snow, and a squadron of seaplanes moored, very likely in the front of what is now Carteret Community College and the State Marine Fisheries buildings. Included in this collection are pictures of Fort Macon, severely overgrown with vegetation, and the messenger pigeon coops. These pigeons were important for the transport of information. Pilots would take the birds in small cages, and if they spotted things such as submarines, schools of fish, rum runners, or distressed vessels, a handwritten note was attached to the pigeon and the bird returned to Camp Glenn. This note was then passed on to boat captains to pursue any actions necessary. As in the past, the Coast Guard, Navy, and Marines work hand in hand whenever and wherever help is needed. There are times when one will find the Marine helicopter Pedro hovering over a Coast Guard boat, assisting each other in the rescue of a distressed vessel. On land, in the air, and at sea, the Coast Guard is there ready to help in time of need. As the Coast Guard motto goes, Semper Paratus, always ready.
Navigation and interdicted 176 illegal migrants.
With us tonight is Commander Bob Atkin, the Group Commander at Fort Macon. Welcome to your Coast Guard, sir. Could you please review the area of responsibility for Group Fort Macon for our audience?
Since I took over in June, we've established search and rescue councils at each of the 5 small boat stations here in eastern North Carolina. We've also started a law enforcement council. Each of these councils essentially invites those agencies which have some bearing on either the search and rescue mission or the law enforcement mission, and brings them in to talk about the things that are going on day to day, as well as establish contingency plans to deal with bigger problems, catastrophes, etc. The objective is to improve our coordination and communication, to pool the resources of the community, the law enforcement and search and rescue communities, so that we can provide the best possible service to our customers, the boating public.
Commander, tonight's show we're reviewing Coast Guard history in eastern North Carolina. We're looking at Camp Glenn in the 1920s, and of course some of the goals and missions we're looking at today involve 1995, which is of course halfway through the 1990s. There's been a lot of developed technologies put into use. Are we actually using any of those technologies today to advance our goals of no SAR cases and no loss of life at sea, sir?
Technology is something that's really exploding throughout the United States in a broad number of ways. And of course, we've heard a lot of talk about internet and the information superhighway. But that superhighway doesn't go across the water. What we use there is we use radios, and that allows us to communicate much more effectively, both with our boats as well as those boats which might be in distress. The use of cellular phones now on the water, a lot of people have those, and that's really helped us a lot of times to communicate very quickly and collect a lot of information to get on scene. Emergency position information radio beacons, EPIRBs, which are now required on commercial fishing vessels, they allow us to really get on scene right away and reduce our rescue to a rescue and not have to expend a lot of resources and time searching for a vessel which has sunk or otherwise been damaged and is in danger. So those are some of the things. Our aircraft, we have new aircraft. They're faster. They have greater capabilities. Our cutters, the 110-foot cutters are relatively new. They're much faster, have much greater capabilities than the smaller cutters have. In the next few years, we're going to get some 47-foot small boats to replace the 44-foot motor lifeboat. These boats are going to be more than 3 times as fast as the 44-footer. They're going to have much greater capability, extended range, and all of these things are really going to help us. We do expect that the 47-footers will be here at Fort Macon and another one down at Oak Island.
Thank you for joining us here tonight, Commander. We look forward to a successful 1995.
Thank you.
Now we take you across the base here at Fort Macon to our 180-foot black-hulled H navigation cutter, the Gentian. We'll be back in a moment.
On an average day in 1994, the Coast Guard boarded 90 large vessels for port safety checks.
On an average Coast Guard day in 1994, the Coast Guard processed 120 seamen's documents.
Tonight we're on board the Coast Guard cutter Gentian, a 180-foot buoy tender working here in the shores of eastern North Carolina. With me is Chief Boatswain Mate Bueller. Welcome to your Coast Guard.
Thank you.
Say, Chief, can you tell me a little about the mission, the Gentian, and some of the accomplishments of the cutter since you've been on board?
The primary mission for the Gentian is aids to navigation. We maintain all the buoys offshore North Carolina, from the Chesapeake Bay down to South Carolina, and up Wilmington, up the Cape Fear River all the way up to Wilmington. The last year's been pretty different from that, though. We spent a lot of time up on the Wilmington, Delaware area, and in Baltimore area breaking ice and helping them replace the ice buoys up there. Further later on this summer, we got involved with Operation Able Manor, Able Vigil, and Support Democracy down in Haiti. And there we repatriated about 200 Haitian people back to Port-au-Prince from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And we also rescued about anywhere from 20 to 30 Haitian or Cuban people from the water, from the rafts outside of Gitmo.
I see. That gives you an effective area of operation of about 3,000 or 4,000 miles. Not bad for 180-foot buoy tender, eh?
Yeah, we've traveled some distance this year.
I see. In addition to that, you're responsible for about how many aids to navigation?
North Carolina, we primarily have between 90 and 100 aids to navigation, our primary aids. In the future, we're looking to pick up a few more up in the Chesapeake Bay area, so hopefully we'll stay pretty busy with that.
Sounds like you've had quite an experience on board, and obviously a well-rounded crew. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Thank you.
Now go ahead and take a look at the Coast Guard cutter Gentian's history. We'll be back in a moment.
On an average Coast Guard day in 1994, the Coast Guard responded to 191 search and rescue cases and 34 chemical or hazardous waste spills.
We're up on the bridge now, the historical Coast Guard cutter Gentian. With me tonight is Petty Officer Williams. Good evening, welcome to your Coast Guard.
Good evening, sir, thank you.
What can you tell me about the Gentian, a little bit of the history here?
Well, sir, the Gentian was built in Duluth, Minnesota by Zenith Dredging Company in 1941 and was in commission in 1942 and has been serving since.
Has the gentian always been at Atlantic Beach, or has it been able to travel around a bit?
Well, sir, the gentian has served over 50 years along the Atlantic coast. It's been home ported in 3 other places, and it's been active in its service, and it has traveled extensively up and down the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast.
What about during the World Wars? Was it active during World War II?
Very active for approximately 3 years, patrolled the north coast of the Atlantic.
Did it carry any kind of anti-submarine or depth charges or anything like that?
Well, I'm not too sure about what type of depth charges we carried. I believe it was equipped with a 3-inch gun and some mortar capabilities.
I see. And how long have you been on board?
I've been on board about 1.5 years, sir.
How does she ride?
She rides like a dream. Rolls a little bit, but it's, you know, you get used to it.
Yeah, I see you've got a lot of old brass up here. Is that a problem, taking care of it?
It's not a problem at all. We take pride in taking care of it, and really we try to keep as much up here and keep it looking good all the time.
It looks like it. Well, thank you for joining us here tonight, and good luck in your buoy tender missions from now on.
Thank you, sir.
An average Coast Guard day in 1994 saved 14 lives, assisted 328 people, saved $2,490,000 in property.
A perfect Sunday afternoon. The good folks of the neighborhood are celebrating the renovation of the old firehouse. The band is playing, everyone has a balloon. And what goes up must come down. Several years ago, someone's balloon came down near here, along New Jersey's Atlantic coast.